What's up, everybody? This is your boy Tech G back with another video to help you successfully pass the CompTIA Network Plus N10-007 certification. So let's get into it. In this video, you're going to learn about network policies and best practices such as privileged user agreements, password policies, onboarding and offboarding procedures, licensing restrictions, international export controls, data loss prevention, remote access policies, incident response policies, bring your own device, acceptable user policies, system life systems, and safety procedures and policies. Let's talk about privileged user agreements. So a privileged user agreement, this enables an individual to take actions that may affect computing systems, network communications, or other accounts, files, data, and processes of other users. Privileged access is typically granted to system administrators, network administrators, staff performing computing, account administration, or other such employees whose job duties require special privileges over a computing system or network. A privileged user agreement might stipulate the following, such as privileged access should be granted only to authorized individuals who read and sign the agreement. Privileged access may be used only to perform assigned job duties. If methods other than using privileged access will accomplish an action, those other methods must be used unless the burden of time or other resources required clearly justifies using privileged access. Privileged access may be used to perform standard system-related duties only on machines and networks whose responsibility is part of the assigned job duties, and privileged access may be used to grant, change, or deny resources, access, or privilege to another individual only for authorized account management activities under exceptional circumstances. Next, we have a password policy, and this is a set of rules designed to enhance computer security by encouraging users to employ strong passwords and use them properly. A password policy is often part of an organization's official regulations and may be taught as part of security awareness training. Either the password policy is merely advisory or the computer systems force users to comply with it. A strong password policy should include the following elements, such as education for end users, strong password requirements such as minimum password lengths, restrictions on the use of proper names, password expirations, no previously used passwords allowed, no words spelled out completely within the password, and the use of characters from the following groups such as upper and lowercase letters, numbers and special characters, and implementing the use of a password manager should also be considered. This software can store passwords for different resources and can even help users generate complex passwords across these resources. Let's talk about onboarding, offboarding procedures. So employee onboarding is a series of tasks that help a chosen candidate become an integrated and functioning member of an organization. Good employee onboarding goes beyond conventional paperwork. It should provide the tools and resources new employees need to become satisfied and productive team members quickly. A good employee onboarding program maximizes productivity by outlining job and organization expectations, reducing errors, and saving time and frustration. A standard employee onboarding might include the following, such as an ID number and PIN assignment, username and password assignment, ID card and access assignments, email mailbox setup, email client setup, workstation setup, workstation network access verification, IT security and best practices training, phone and bring your own device setup, and time management and other HR software training. Employee offboarding, this is the strategic process of disengaging an employee from your workforce. In other words, it initiates the formal separation between the employer and the employee. The process begins with an exit interview conducted by the HR team. Although the HR team is the one that initiates the offboarding process, the IT department is the one who needs to see it through to prevent an outgoing employee from turning into a malicious insider. Next, we have licensing restrictions. So you may also need to provide training in the proper licensing and use of corporate hardware and software. As networks have become more complex, so have licensing agreements. It is important that users remain in compliance with all existing licensing agreements and restrictions. International export control. So another important best practice is to educate IT staff and end users on the international export rules your organization must observe. Using the U.S. government as an example, specific agencies regulate the transfer of information, commodities, technology, and software considered to be strategically important to the U.S. in the interest of national security, economic, and/or foreign policy concerns. Your management must understand that non-compliance with export controls can result in severe monetary and criminal penalties against both an individual in your company as well as the organization itself. Next, we have data loss prevention, and this is software that detects potential data breaches or data exfiltration transmissions and prevents them by monitoring, detecting, and blocking sensitive data while in use, which is known as endpoint actions, in motion or network traffic, and at rest, which is known as data storage. Most DLP policies focus on the use of content level scanning and deep content inspection to identify sensitive data and protect it. The following actions should be considered when designing a DLP policy, such as consider any risk assessments your company has performed, incorporate key members of management from the various departments of your organization, identify the most sensitive data of the organization, outline a phased implementation of DLP, and incorporate guidelines for tracking success of the initiative, attempt to minimize any negative impacts on the business caused by the policy implementation, periodically review the DLP policy, and include the appropriate event monitoring specifics as they apply to the policy. Next, we have remote access policies. So a remote access policy, this is the document which outlines and defines acceptable methods of remotely connecting to the internal network. It is essential in large organizations where networks are geographically dispersed and extend into insecure network locations, such as public networks or unmanaged home networks. A remote access policy should cover all available methods to remotely access internal resources such as dial-in, ISDN, frame relay, telnet access from the internet, and cable modems. Other remote access policies that you should consider are the scope of the policy should be clear and may include applicable targets such as employees, contractors, vendors, and agents with company-owned or personally owned computers or workstations used to connect to the corporate network. Clearly detailed requirements of the policy itself, which might include encryption and security standards, as well as the acceptable areas of network access. Sections regarding compliance, which could include exceptions to the policy, the measurements for compliance, and the consequences of non-compliance, and a section that indicates what other security policies for the network closely relate to this policy. Incident response policy. So an incident as defined in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, NIST. This is a violation or imminent threat of violation of computer security policies, acceptable use policies, or standard computer security practices. An incident response capability is necessary for rapidly detecting incidents, minimizing loss and destruction, mitigating the weaknesses that were exploited, and restoring computing resources. Because security issues are inevitable for a network, it is critical to prepare a comprehensive incident response policy. And such a policy might outline various phases of an incident response plan, including the following. So the first one is you want to prepare, and this involves being able to identify the start of an incident, preparing a recovery plan, how to get everything back to normal, and creating established security policies. Next, you want to identify. This is identifying the actual security incident. Next, you want to contain. This involves protecting and keeping available critical and computing resources and determining the operational status of the infected computer, system, or network. The goal is to limit the security incident from spreading. Next, you want to eradicate. This deals with the removal of the attack or infection. Next is recover. This involves service restoration as well as recertification of network devices and systems. And then you want to review. So all phases should be analyzed in the review to gauge their effectiveness and modify the incident response policy as needed for the future. And then we have BYOD, or bring your own device. And this refers to being allowed to use one's personally owned device rather than being required to use an official provided device. There are two major contexts in which this term is used. One is in the mobile phone industry, where it refers to carriers allowing customers to activate their existing phone on the network rather than being forced to buy a new device from the carrier. The other is in the workplace, where it refers to a policy of permitting employees employees to bring personally owned devices such as laptops, tablets, smartphones, etc. to work, and to use those devices to access privileged company information and applications. And a BYOD policy should incorporate the following. It should have an explicit and detailed list of what devices are actually permitted, an explicit security policy for each device or device category, the appropriate corporate support policy for each device or device category, a clear delineation of what applications and data are owned by the corporation versus that owned by the user and or employee, an explicit list of applications permitted in the BYOD environment, an integration of the BYOD policy and the acceptable use policy, and a detailed presentation of the exit policies for employees as they relate to BYOD. Next, we have an AUP, or an acceptable use policy. So an acceptable use policy, this is a set of rules applied by the owner, creator, or administrator of a network, website, or service that restricts the ways in which the network, website, or system may be used and sets guidelines as to how it should be used. AUP documents are written for corporations, businesses, universities, schools, internet service providers, and website owners, often to reduce the potential for legal action that may be taken by a user, and often with little prospect of enforcement. An AUP should be the following. It should be clear, concise, detailed regarding acceptable and unacceptable use of the network, congruent with the associated overall security policies of the organization, concrete regarding consequences of AUP violations. Also, it should be updated and reviewed regularly. Next, we have an NDA, or a non-disclosure agreement. So an NDA, this is a legal contract or part of a contract between at least two parties that outlines confidential material, knowledge, or information that the parties wish to share with one another for certain purposes, but wish to restrict access to. In other words, it is a contract through which the parties agree not to disclose any information covered by the agreement. An NDA creates a confidential relationship between the parties, typically to protect any type of confidential and proprietary information or trade secrets. In NDAs, they are quite common for employees to sign during the onboarding process. Next, we have the system life cycle. So a system life cycle, this is also referred to as the application development life cycle. And this is a process for planning, creating, testing, and deploying an information system. The systems development life cycle concept applies to a range of hardware and software configurations, as a system can be composed of hardware only, software only, or a combination of both. And the usual stages of this life cycle are the following. You have the requirement analysis, design, development and testing, implementation, documentation, and evaluation. And then we have safety procedures and policies. So some safety policies and procedures for the networking equipment in your organization should include the following commonalities. You should be following the installation and maintenance guides for the equipment as closely as possible. You need to keep all work areas as clean and organized as possible. You need to wear appropriate safety equipment. You need to seek assistance when lifting heavy network objects. You need to exercise caution when interacting with electricity. And you need to avoid other risks of electric shock. All right, so in summary, ladies and gentlemen, this has been my class on network policies and best practices, where we talked about privileged user agreements, password policies, onboarding and offboarding procedures, licensing restrictions, international export controls, data loss prevention, remote access policies, incident response policies, BYOD, AUP, NDA, system life cycles, and safety procedures and policies. Now, if you felt like you've gotten something valuable out of this information, go ahead and hit the like button, share button, drop a comment, but most importantly, subscribe to this channel. Also, go check out my website, Technology G, so that you can get read up on the latest and greatest to help you successfully pass the CompTIA Network Plus N10-007 certification. And until next video, ladies and gentlemen, peace.